This is, I think, going to be one of the most important videos that I've ever made on this channel. Because if you understand this design pattern that I'm about to teach you, and you really get it, and you apply it to your own projects, I'm telling you that it's going to be virtually impossible for you to write bad code in your React applications. It's that important. But there's actually more. So in this video, I'm only going to be showing you one design pattern, the most important one, the one that you have to know as a React developer. But I've also gone ahead and created a list of 10 more design patterns that are equally as important, just maybe a little bit smaller, in a document that I'm giving to you completely for free. This document will have text and code examples of 10 different design patterns on top of the existing one that I'm showing in this video that are honestly crucial as a React developer. So once again, it's completely free. And the way that you can get it is you can join the newsletter, Import React, which is my free newsletter. You're going to be able to click it below. As soon as you join the newsletter, you're going to receive the design pattern document, again, completely for free in your inbox. It's honestly a no-brainer. So once again, the link is in the description. I highly recommend it. Watch this video, read the document, and never look back. All right, so let's begin. Now, unfortunately, this design pattern that I'm going to show you doesn't really have a name because it's actually a lot of smaller design patterns kind of merged into one, into what I like to call and really think about the correct way to architect your React application. So that means the proper way to create your components, the way to structure and create subcomponents and combine them together, the proper way to create custom hooks and custom functions, and also where to put them in the project, and generally how to set up and architect all of the different pieces of a React project to be as efficient as possible and to follow all of the best practices in code and in React. So that's what you're going to learn in this video. And the best way to learn that is to take some code, an example of code like we have here, that violates all of these design patterns, that doesn't follow the best practices, that is very messy and difficult to understand. And first of all, understand why this is considered bad code, right? That's also very important. And then refactor it to see a different approach of doing the same thing, having the same functionality, just in a way that's better, follows more the best practices, and is more efficient and easier to understand as a developer, because that really matters in a React project. So over here, we have an example of something that, let me just maybe zoom in a little bit so you can see a little bit better. This is an example of some typical React code that you would probably see in a project that you work on. Many times I've opened up projects that I haven't built myself that I just joined at a later point, only to see components that look like this, right? You have your typical here wall of state, as I like to call it, right? All of these things are different state variables and oftentimes related to different things that don't have any connection to one another. Like we have the count, we have the name, email is visible, item, selected item, and then is dark mode. That seems like a lot of things to put in this one component, again, all unrelated. Then we have a bunch of hooks over here. We have some use effects that do some things with the local storage, then lock some things to the local storage as well, sets the document title, selects an item. Then we have a bunch of functions over here that do different things, manipulating that state, right? Increment function, which really is not needed because we already have the set count here. Why do we need a separate increment function, especially if we're not using it in multiple places, right? It's a bunch of code, right? All of this code right here, and then a bunch of JSX doing a bunch of different things. And it's honestly confusing. If I was to join this project as a new developer, especially as a junior developer, I would feel intimidated. I wouldn't know where to start and I wouldn't know what to follow as the best practice because this doesn't follow any of them. And unfortunately, like I said before, this is the state of a lot of these projects, these React projects out there, and the projects that you're statistically going to run into as you start working in different teams, different projects, different companies. You will often find code like this that was written by people that didn't fundamentally understand React, how it's meant to be used, how it was designed to be used, and they just wrote code that is functional, but is in no way efficient, and in no way does it follow any best practices or design patterns. So now let's take this code, let's refactor it piece by piece, because we actually need to go piece by piece here. That really should go us to show you exactly how messy this component is. And I'm going to try to make this a little bit better and learn a thing or two about design patterns and how to properly architect React applications along the way. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to start breaking up this wall of state right here, right? All of this should not belong to this one component, especially the app component, which really, what is the app component, right? This tells me that this is the main entry point of the application. So it should theoretically only do one thing, which is basically take all of the different pieces of the application that are scattered throughout the code base in different folders and put them together. This component is doing none of that. It's actually holding the state, being responsible for the state and the functions that manipulate the state and all of the code required to actually implement the functionality of account, of name, of all of this, right? So that's violating the single responsibility principle, one design pattern in React, which is every single component or function should ideally only do one thing. And as soon as it needs to do something else, it delegates it to another component or another function and then uses that function instead. So logically, we have a count over here, which we could split up in a separate component, maybe even a separate hook. Then we have name, email, and then all of these is visible items and selected items. They're all part of the same thing, which loosely can be transcribed to some sort of form that is related to the user and their items. So we can also put that in a separate place. And then we have this state here for the dark mode, which again would be its own separate thing. Dark mode has nothing to do with the count, nothing to do with the user. So we can already see a visual distinction between different sections of the state, which we can split up, put into different places and combine them together. So let's start with that and see where that gets us. So first, this count over here, right? So we're going to take this, put it in a separate component, and then we're going to be able to use that count variable inside of this component and potentially any other component that also needs a count. We also have some functions over here, if I saw them correctly, increment and decrement the count. These only update the count. These should also go along with it in the separate hook. So let's do that. Let's come here to our sidebar. Let's come here to SRC. Let's make a new folder, call it hooks. And in here, I'm going to call this hook. We're going to make a new file, use count like so. Then we're going to open the hook and there we go. And actually this should be TS, not TSX. So we're just going to put it over here. TS, there we go. We're going to export function use count. And that is going to take, for now, at least until we need to make some changes, no arguments. Then we're going to come here to the app. We're going to take this count state variable. We're going to put it in here, right? And then we're going to import use state like this. And then we're going to take the functions over here. We also have some use effects that set the count based on the local storage. So we'll also have to do that. So we'll take these use effects over here. Let me just see if my editor will actually let me take them. And we're going to put them as well with the component and import use effect over here. Then we're going to come back and we're going to see we also have this increment and decrement function, which we'll also want to take and put in this hook as well, because they also belong here. So we'll do that. And I believe with this, we have all of the functionality removed and we no longer have any errors inside of our component, except this JSX, which we're also actually going to deal with a little bit later. But in terms of our hook, this is sufficient. And I think we got everything in this custom hook. So that's great, right? And this is also another design pattern in React, which is custom hooks, right? As soon as you have functionality that is reused by multiple components that could potentially be shared, you put it in a custom hook, you create a custom hook, call it use whatever the hook name is, and then you put all of the code in here that is required to make that functionality work, and then any component or any other custom hook can use that hook and get access to that functionality. This way, you only write it once, you define it once in one place, and you reuse it and you share it across the entire application. Now, looking at this code, there's actually a little bit of things that we can do here to even improve this custom hook, because now all that we did is we just took the code that already existed and we just put it in here. But it doesn't mean that the code was perfect and that could not be optimized, right? We can do some improvements here, and specifically with this use effect over here and the local storage, we can actually find a better solution for this. So essentially this use effect, what it does is whenever this component mounts or whenever this custom hook actually runs the first time, it is going to check the local storage for this actual count over here if it's stored in the local storage, and if it is going to set it in the state over here. Now doing it inside of a use effect is fine because it works. It will achieve what we want, our goal to actually get the count from local storage. This actually, by the nature of use effect, will run after the first render, will run asynchronously, and will actually cause a re-render of the component because it will have to set the count again once it got it from the local storage. That is going to be 2 renders to get the count from the local storage, and the first render is going to have the count of 0, which doesn't know or doesn't include the value from local storage. So we can improve this by killing the use effect. It's always a good idea to remove use effects that you don't actually need, and we can just default this use state over here to actually check the local storage first without the need of a use effect. So for that, I'm going to come here at the top and I'm going to create a new function, call it function initialize count like this, and we're going to give this function over here empty for now. And then inside of the body of the function, I'm going to take this code over here, put it inside of here, and then I'm just going to return either the saved count if we have it, because again, we might not have it in the local storage. So if we have a saved count, I'm just going to convert it here to a number, saved count like this, Otherwise, I'm going to return 0, right? So this is the same functionality as this use effect over here. We're checking local storage for the count. And if we have a count, we're returning the number version of that count because it is going to be a string in local storage. This function gets the count from the local storage. If we have it, returns a number of saved count. Otherwise, it returns 0. So that's our initialize count function. And then we can just give that function here to this use state, because not only can you provide it a default value, you can also provide it a function. We can do initialize count like this, and we can provide a function to get the initial state, which is going to look at the local storage, which means that there's no longer a need for this use effect because this functionality is already going to be part of our use state initially by this function over here. So this is great. This is an improvement. Now, some of you might not know this, and this might be a surprise to you, but maybe you have the question, why didn't I use a parenthesis over here to actually call the function and give it to use state as the initial value? The reason I didn't do this, and first of all, this works, this is functionally equivalent. If you do this way, this function is actually going to get ran every single time that this component or hook renders, even if the value is only going to ever be used initially the first time to set the count. However, if you give this here as a reference, React is only going to run this function once when this component or custom hook mounts, get the value, assign it here to the actual count as its initial value, and then never call that function again, right? So this is a performance optimization, because if you do it this way, the function gets called every single render, but only the first time does its result actually get used. So every other time it's unnecessary. If you do it this way, it's only going to get called once initially on mount, put the result, and then you are good to go. So this you can do in React. And if you didn't know about this, well, now you do. And with this, we've already improved our custom hook over here. We've used another function over here. So this function only has one responsibility, and we're using it efficiently inside of this state over here to get the initial value of the count. That's great. Let's move on. What else could we do? Well, this use effect over here, I mean, we just want to log and actually set the count inside of the local storage every time that it changes. So there's nothing really for us to do here because we need to have a use effect that listens to the count. And whenever the count changes, it's just going to get synced automatically with the local storage. So we're just going to leave this as is. This is perfectly fine. But then we have the increment and decrement functions, which we actually need to return along with the count over here of our custom hook. So let's do that. Let's return. And here we're going to do count, increment, and then decrement. And here we're just going to make one little optimization here. Instead of just passing the functions directly, I'm going to convert these to a const. So we're going to do const increment equals, and this is then going to be an arrow function that I'm going to put inside of a use callback. So we're going to do use callback like this, and then pass it here a function, and I believe this should work, and then pass it here the dependency array, and then the function over here, and we are good to go. And we're going to do exactly the same thing with the decrement function. So just do this decrement, and here set count -1. And the reason we're doing this is because we're going to be using these functions inside of our components, and we can't control where these functions are going to get used. And if they have to be used inside of a use effect or inside of a use memo callback, we're going to have to wrap them in use callback to not prevent the use effect, actually, of running unnecessarily. Because as we know, in React, functions are not stable references. So what we do whenever we create custom hooks like this is you just wrap them in use callback, and you prevent whoever is using these functions to have to do them, to have to wrap in their own use callback, right? That's what a lot of third-party libraries do. Whenever you have a function that you're accessing from them, you usually don't have to wrap it yourself in use callback because they do it for you. And that's exactly what we did here. And with this, we now have our use count custom hook, which we can directly use inside of the app component. So let's go here to the app component, and here at the top, or even here below, we can just do something like const count increment decrement. And we're going to make this equal to use count like this. And now we have access to the same values over here, count, increment, and decrement, that our JSX is actually using over here, right? So this is great. We've extracted custom functionality in a custom hook that we can then reuse inside of the application. But we can do more. We can also take this piece of code over here, this JSX, and we can actually put this in a separate component and use that component instead. Because if you look here, what is this JSX actually doing? It's just rendering the actual count over here in a paragraph tag, and then just rendering the buttons to increment and decrement the count. Maybe we want to show this counter on multiple pages in multiple components, so it would make sense for us to create and put all of this code inside of a custom component, and then use the use count custom hook inside of that component. Again, make things reusable, and then if you ever need to reuse it across the application, you can, because you have it reusable in a separate component. So we can come here, we can create a new folder, we can call this one components. and we can do in here counter.tsx, and then over here we can just do rjsfc like this to create a component called the counter component. And this is going to return exactly the same code over here. This div, right? We're just going to cut this over here. Let me cut it correctly. There we go. Here we're just going to return like this, and then we're going to do here. And now obviously we need to have access to increment and decrement and the count as well, which we can easily get because we have them inside of this hook. So we can also take this hook over here that we just created and we can combine it in its own component. And now we have all of the functionality related to a counter. There should be counter inside of a custom component with this JSX using a custom hook, right? And this is really efficient. We're following best practices here because this counter component only does one thing. It handles the functionality of what is to be a counter. It then uses a custom hook, which again, it delegates the actual implementation of the count of the increment function, decrement function to a custom hook, which is a good thing. And then it renders its own JSX, which uses these values. So if I want this counter, I can just use the component. If I just want the count and make my own counter in a separate component, I can also just use the custom hook. This is extensible, this is flexible, and this is reusable. And that's the way that most of your components in your application should look like. So now with this, we can go back here to the app component. We no longer have a count over here. And here inside of our JSX, we're missing the functionality, but we can just add it here by saying counter like this. What happened? We're going to say counter, and we're going to import from components/counter, and we have our counter application. And now this entire functionality of a counter is only one line in this component, and we've made things better. Good. Let's keep going. So we're going to come here back to our wall of state, and we're going to continue breaking this apart and putting things into separate components. So the next step for us to do is all of this state over here that seems to be related to some sort of form related to the user. We can first start by just putting all of this in a separate component and then seeing if there are other things that we can do to improve this a little bit further. So I'm going to come here inside of components, make a new file, call this user form.tsx. And inside of here, we're just going to wait a bit. My computer is deciding to be slow today. We're going to do rjsfc. We're going to create user form. And in here, we're going to put all of the state and code that we had. So let's take all of this code and let's see what we come up with. If we put it here, we're going to have to import useState. That's totally fine. So let's import useState from React. Then we're going to see what errors we have. So we no longer have a name here. So we'll need to take this. We'll need to take selected item as well. We'll need to take all of these functions related to name change and then toggle visibility and then add item and select item as well, right? So already you can see that this is a lot of code for something that is the user form, but really we're not sure, right? Like I'm saying it's the user form because that's what it kind of looks like, but it could actually be something else. And that's a sign of bad code. And that's a sign that something should be done to change it, to improve it. So we're going to cut all of this here and we're going to put them inside of here and just dump all of the code that we had inside of this and then import useEffect like this. And then there we go. We have these functions which aren't used because we need to actually get the JSX. We're also missing a ref over here. So let's take the ref and let's also take the ref as well. And then we're going to put the ref over here. I always like to make a visual separation between my state and my functions and my ref. So I always make a little gap over here, a line break. Now we have the input ref and there we go. We're just missing everything in the return function. So let's come here to our JSX and I believe it's all of this over here. Yeah, all of this has errors until the last paragraph, which is related to dark mode. We can just take all of this and put it here inside of the form component like this. And then let's just fix the formatting and save. And we have an error over here. Yes, we need to put all of this in a form because this is a form and this wasn't done actually. So again, another sign of something that we can improve. And now we have everything in a form. We have the same code, the same functionality, just in a separate form. That's good. Even though we didn't really improve anything, we did put this in a separate component. So now it follows the single responsibility principle. There's a separation of concerns and this already is better. So then in the app component, we can just come here and here we can just use the user form. So we can do user form, import this from component/user form, and already look at our app component. Look at how much smaller it is. If I also just clean up here these imports, these unused imports over here, this use effect and this use ref, look at how small this component is, right? This is now 22 lines of code, including the actual imports. We have 3 lines of imports over here. That's what you want to do. Whenever you see a big component in React, you want to ask yourself, what is this component doing and what should it be doing? Is it doing too many things? Can I break things up into multiple things and put them, right? That is the design pattern that I'm trying to teach in this video, because you take a component that's really big, really intimidating, you split it into multiple parts, and then you turn it into something like this. This is super easy to understand, super easy to work on. And if you want to access the counter, you go to this component. If you want to access the form, you go to this component, and everything is in its proper place, and it's very efficient. So then going back to our user form, let's look here and see what else we can improve. Well, the first thing that I'm seeing here is that this use effect essentially changes the document title to hello name as this form is being changed. I understand why this is being done, but I generally don't think that we need this. And if we did want to implement this, I would not put this as part of the user form, because now the user form is starting to change things that are outside of its scope. And generally you don't want to do that in your application. So because this is such a feature that really isn't necessary, like why would you want to update the document title to the user's name as they type? What if they type some random gibberish, right? We're just going to remove it. And this is perfectly fine. And in your projects, if you're working in code that somebody else wrote, you have to look at that code and you have to ask yourself, is this code pertinent? Is it needed? Or can it be removed? Because if you remove it, again, we're removing an extra use effect. We're removing the chance for something to go wrong and an extra render cycle in the component. And that's always a good thing. And then here as well, we have another use effect over here, which simply, if there's a selected item, just logs it to the console, right? We don't need to do this. We don't need to log this. And this was probably here at an earlier stage of development when they wanted to log that this was working correctly. And then maybe this just got forgotten and found its way to production, right? So it's our job as good developers to spot these things and say, hey, this isn't needed. We should actually remove it and make this component a little bit simpler. And now, as you can see, we no longer even have use effect in this component, which means that we can remove it directly from the imports over here, and we're that much better for it. And then let's see what else we can do. Well, we have these 2 functions here, handle name change, handle email change, which is essentially just set the name and set the email to e.target.value. This, I generally don't like to do this because this is creating a function for nothing. I would rather just inline these functions themselves directly inside of the JSX and be done with it. Another advantage of doing that is you don't have to retype this event over here, because the type can actually be inferred from the component that you're using it in. So I'm going to come here and just remove both of these functions, handle email change, handle name change, and I'm going to come here in the JSX, and instead I'm just going to do here access the event, which is again the type inferred, and here we're going to do set name, and we're going to pass here what happened, set name, and we're going to pass here e.target.value. Again, same functionality as we had before. We just inlined it, and it's a little bit simpler because we don't have to define a function over here. I generally like to do this. This is also a smaller design pattern that you can apply in your React projects. And then we can do the same for the email. I can access the E over here, and then here we're going to do set email e.target.value like this. Now, ideally, you wouldn't even do these as proper states. You would use something like React Hook Form to have a proper form management solution. In this case, we're not going to bother. I'm going to try to keep this video a little bit shorter. But yeah, ideally, you would use something like React Hook Form because it makes all of this a lot simpler. And then we have all of this functionality related to the items. So here we have items, which is a state of an array, right, of strings. Then we have isVisible, which essentially toggles the items. As you can see over here, if isVisible, we're rendering all of this div over here. So that's all of the items where we're looping all of the items and also the button to add item. I'm not saying this is good code. This is just the code that we have and that we have to work with. And oftentimes you don't get to choose the code that you're working with, but you have to choose the only thing you get to choose actually is the way that you approach solving it and making it better. So that's what we're doing. So what I would do at the very least, because I don't want to take too many risks and also maybe introduce some bugs, I just want to put everything that is related to items in a separate component, even in the same file, just again, to have a separation of concerns, to put things that are different in different places and see if there's anything else that we can do later on to actually improve it. First, I'm going to come here at the bottom of this component and I'm going to create a new component over here, call it function user form items, and here we're just going to put nothing for now. I'm defining it inside of this file because this component is not going to be exported and it's only going to be used inside of this file. So instead of creating a separate file for it and having to import it and then always navigate between 2 different files, I'm just going to put it here, and this is fine. You can have multiple components in the same file, and this is also a smaller design pattern that is perfectly valid to use in your React applications. And here we're just going to do a return And we're going to pass all of this state over here, right? So let's see, how did I do it over here? So we have the button as well, right? So we're going to take all of this code over here, right? Just everything that is related to items, cut it, and then just return it over here. And then we also have to return it, I believe, in a div. What happened? Did we miss something? Let's just first return it as a fragment just to make sure that we get it right. So we're just going to do here, and then this should be fine. I believe I missed a div somewhere because there is a div. And this is a div, and this should be, let's just put a div here for good measure, div like this, and then we should be fine. And then we just need to get toggle visibility is visible over here and just get the ref. So first let's start with the ref because I feel that's more important. So again, we're going to take this ref, we're going to put it inside of this component over here. So now we have access to the ref, so that's good. Then we need the toggle visibility function, and then we need a state for is visible. Now, because this state is being updated inside of this component, we have the button here to actually, where is it? To show the, yeah, there you go, the button to show the on click, to toggle the visibility on click. That state should belong to the user form items component. So let's take the state over here and let's take is visible and put it here inside of the user form items component. Then this toggle visibility function, again, we can just inline this because all that this really does is it just sets is visible to the opposite of is visible. So first of all, we don't need to do this anymore. We can just remove it. And here we can just inline it like this, and we can just do set is visible and then pass it the opposite of is visible. And again, we don't have to create another function. And this is a small step that we can do to improve this. Then we also need the function to add an item. So I feel that this also belongs here because we have the items over here. So let's also take the function to add an item and let's put it over here inside of this component. And again, I'm not improving anything specifically. I am just putting things in separate places just to make it a little bit more clear to understand what's going on. And then naturally, things are going to come up that we can use to actually improve this. And then what we need is we actually need the items and then the set items function, which again, all seem to belong to this component, as well as the selected item component, all seem to belong to this component. So we should also put all of these things there. So let's just take these because these are no longer used, and let's put them, and again, make some space in here to not make this more complicated on ourselves. And here we can just put our state. Let me just organize it properly to put state with state because that's just a little bit better. And then we have our three state variables over here, is visible, items, and selected items. This is more plausible that this relates to the same thing, right? This is all related to the items on the user form, right? So that's a good thing. Then we have the ref, which is only used in this component, then the function to add the item, and then the select item function, which honestly, again, we can just inline this because instead of select item, we can just use set selected item, and this should work. Set selected item, and again, we have no type errors. This is perfectly fine, and we can just remove this function. And now this is our component, user form items. It's super small, concise, and again, only relates to the items on the user form, which means that we can come here and we can just do user form items rather, and just use the component instead. Again, this made this user form component smaller. It now only has 2 pieces of state. We went to, from how many? We went to 5 from 2, which is good. And we have all of the stuff related to a form over here. And then everything else related to the items is in a separate component defined in the same file because it doesn't need to be exported. It's only used in this file. And again, this one's also manageable. 3 pieces of state, 1 ref over here, 1 function, and the JSX to actually make this work. Now, obviously, we can improve this a lot further. We can create custom components for like all of the items over here and then reuse them across the application. We're not going to do it because I feel that you've understood by now the actual point of this video, the actual point of this most important design pattern, which is that you take things, you split them up, you break them apart, and then you reuse them across the application because that is efficient and that is scalable. And actually, I just realized over here that we have something missing. We have a form, but we have actually no function to submit the form. So we probably want that. So we can do something like async function handle submit. And then this would take maybe some data. This would take the E here, and that's going to be, I believe, form event like this. There we go. Import this from React. And here we can just do something with the data. So do something with data, right? Send it to a backend or something. And then here we can do on submit, and then we can do handle submit, and there we go. Now we have a function to actually submit our form, which this component didn't have before, right? So there we go. Now we have the user form component. It's super small. It is being used here inside of the app component, and everything is starting to look a little bit more clear, a little bit more easier to understand, and definitely less intimidating, which is good. We're almost done. And finally, the last thing that I want to do is all that we have left is this DarkMode property over here and this function to toggle it, which again is just used here. So what we can do is essentially create a custom component, put all of this functionality inside and be done with it. Just use that component in here. So let's come here inside of components. We're going to create a new component. We're going to call this one DarkMode toggle.tsx. This is going to create a new component. We're going to do RJSFC. That is going to be DarkMode toggle like this. We're going to take the same code that we have here. We're going to put this here inside of DarkMode toggle. We're going to import our use state over here. Then we have our function. Then we're going to take this div over here. We're going to cut it and we're going to return it over here as what this component returns. And now, again, we don't need toggle dark mode. We don't need this extra function. We can just kill it. We can just do, let's kill it first. So we can just do set dark mode, set, call this as a function actually, set is dark mode, and then the opposite of is dark mode like this. And now we have the same functionality in a custom hook, no redundant function, and we can just come here to our app component and we can do over here, we can just use dark mode toggle. And now we have almost the same functionality. We still have an error here, but our component now is 15 lines of code, imports included, and actually 14 lines of code, imports included, and it's so small. And that's how most of your components should be. I know I'm saying this a lot because I really want to drill this into you. This is how most of your React components should be. If you see a component that's much larger, that's a code smell, and that's a sign that something has to be changed and improved to make this better. Now back to this error here. Yes, we're no longer having access to is dark mode because now it's only inside of this component. And the thing is, this is actually bad code because this is dark mode property is only local to this component here. It's not being shared across the application. You wouldn't want to do this. Ideally, you would convert this into a context that holds the application appearance, the state, the theme, if you will, if it's dark mode or not. And then you would access that property over here in the app component or any other component using a custom hook that accesses the context. I'm not going to do it in this video because if I did, it would just make this video too long, but I have a bunch of videos. I even have a tutorial video on use context that shows you exactly how to do this. But again, I wouldn't do it exactly like this. I would create a context, share this value because it just makes more sense for something like dark mode. But yeah, I mean, look, we've done a lot of great things in here, right? So actually let's just fix this one because again, we're not going to use it. Let's just pretend that it's not actually useful in our actual project, so we can just remove it. And this is the final state of our app component. 3 imports over here, 3 different components, the app component, and then it just renders everything else, right? This goes back to what I said in the beginning of this video. You take a look at this app component and you're thinking, what should this app component actually do? It shouldn't implement every single feature of the entire app. Your entire React application should not be one main component. Instead, it should take all of the different pieces of code, that means components, hooks, functions, from across the application, across different folders, and put them all together and just render them. It shouldn't implement any of them, right? And that's exactly what we've done here. The app component is super small. It uses everything that it needs, and the actual implementation is delegated to each of these components. And then each of these components are super small, super simple, super reusable. They all only do one thing. They follow the single responsibility principle. And we have the same here for the DarkMode toggle. We have the same thing here for the user form. We've refactored this. We've made things a little bit better. Obviously, there's more things we could do. We would probably want to create a custom component for the input over here. Maybe we also want to create a custom component for the button, right? I'll leave that for you to do. You can actually get access to this repository in the description. I'm not going to do it, but the concept remains the same. Everything that can be shared, everything that is reusable, put it in a separate function component and just use it across the application. And that's exactly what we've done here. And I think honestly, the counterexample is the best example of this because we have a custom hook that we created and we're using it inside of a custom component that we created. And this is super flexible, super reusable, and it's just beautiful. It's art at this point. So really, again, going back to what I said in the beginning of this video, if there's one thing that you get from my videos, of all the videos that you watch, it's this design pattern, how to properly structure and architect your React projects, your code, your components, your functions, your custom hooks. Because if you do this, and if you understand this and you really get this, I will be very surprised if you actually write bad code in your React applications, because this makes it very hard. If you split everything up, it's very hard to make messy code, and you're just going to end up with beautiful code that is easy to read and understand. And that's what you want. That's what this whole concept of design patterns is. And that's what the whole concept of this video is. And hopefully by now you got that. Right? So again, you're going to have access to the code for this, the actual repository. It's going to be linked in the description. And remember, you also have access to 10 other design patterns that are equally as important as this one, just in an actual document, because if I made a video with all of these, it would have been like a 5-hour-long video, in a document that is completely for free. I went through the painstaking effort and time to actually make this for you, and I give it to you completely for free. The only thing that you have to do to get it is just sign up to the newsletter, which is completely free. As soon as you sign up, it's linked in the description. You are going to get the document in your inbox, and you can continue with this video and actually apply those to your React projects. And like I said in the beginning of this video, for the last time, never look back and never write bad React code again. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more videos just like this one, make sure to leave this video a big thumbs up. You can also click here to subscribe, or you can click here to watch a different video of mine that YouTube seems to think that you're really going to enjoy. And with that being said, my name has been Darius Kozden. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Ciao, ciao.